think that was less than a minute, but let's start, slowly, but surely. I'm really glad to have the opportunity to sort of share this time and this space with what we consider great faculty at CUNY. This faculty that we have the opportunity to invite to our summer institute and to work together in different projects. And we are really we're always excited to meet with them, and to learn from them. And we wanted to share that with all of the participants at the Teach at CUNY Institute. Well, my name is Luis Henao. I work at the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm a graduated from the Latin American and Iberian Languages and Cultures, or something like that program. I graduated a couple of years ago. I'm also part of the Humanities Alliance, where I have the opportunity to work with Rojo as well. And today I have the opportunity to host this conversation with an amazing bunch of faculty at CUNY. So I'm going to briefly introduce all of you. Since sometimes there's the speaker view, so people only see the person who's speaking. When I mention your name, can you just say hi briefly so we can center your image into people's perspectives? So we have Ria Banerjee. Hi, Ria.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Louis.
So Ria is an associate professor of English at Guttman Community College. Her scholarly interests are in British and modern and European modernism and post-World War II film. She has written for Modernism, Modernity, and the South Atlantic Review, among other scholarly venues. She teaches undergrad courses in developmental writing and literature and graduate film courses with the Film Studies Certificate Program at the GC. We also have Shawna Brandle. Hi, Shawna.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks to you. Shawna is a professor of political science at Kingsborough Community College. She has a PhD in political science for the Graduate Center. She has previously served as an open education coordinator at Kingsborough, and in the fall of 2021, she will be a Fulbright scholar at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan. Her research areas include human rights, media coverage of human rights and refugee issues, and open educational resources in higher education. She's the author of Television News and Human Rights in the US and UK, The Violations Will Not Be Televised. And her current book project is co-authored with Dr. Janet Rayleigh. She spends her spare time, because she has spare time on top of everything that she's doing, making art with her family. We also have Donna McGregor. Hi, Donna.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Well, Donna is analytically trained inorganic chemist who earned her PhD in analytical chemistry from the Graduate Center at CUNY. Her PhD thesis focused specifically on understanding the speciation and oxidation state stabilization of technetium-99, also known as TC99, using polyoxometalates as metal oxides mimics. I have been practicing that line for the whole morning. Her primary research interests today are in the fields of chemical education pedagogy, the continued understanding of TC99 coordination chemistry, and the use of short peptide building blocks for the intelligent design of more complex metal chelating systems and nanostructures with proton transfer capabilities. Donna started her academic career at Hunter College in 2009, and in 2015 moved to Lehman College to help build their chemistry program. Donna is an expert in chemical pedagogy, and her research in this area is specifically focused on the use of active learning to increase retention and close the pervasive achievement gap in general chemistry. And we also have Dr. Rojo Robles. Rojo, hi.
Hola. Hi, everybody. Buenas tardes.
Rojo is a writer. Rojo is a writer, filmmaker, and professor born and raised in Puerto Rico. He graduated from the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, with a BA in theater and an MA in comparative literature. He completed his master in philosophy and his PhD degrees in Latin American, Iberian, and Latino cultures at CUNY's Graduate Center. Having taught at various CUNY colleges, He's now an assistant professor in Black and Latino Studies at Baruch College, where his courses are particularly focused on Latin American, Latina, Latinx, and Afro-diasporic literature, film, and intermediate cultures with emphasis on Puerto Rico. Along with teaching, researching, and writing, Dr. Robles has substantial work as fiction writer, playwright, and filmmaker. I don't know how people have so many time for do so many cool stuff, but that's good. That's the kind of company that we want to have. So again, thanks for having you here, and I just want to say to all of the attendees that you can sort of react, comment in the using the chat function. You also can submit any questions that you have at any moment with the Q&A options, and the TLC members are going to help us sort of sort the questions and direct them to the panelists. So I want to start by asking all of you to tell us what is one thing that you know now that you wish you had known when you started teaching, just to place yourselves in the position of these new instructors who are soon to walk into a classroom or a Zoom space or any other their digital space for the first time. So let's start with Donna.
So I think there are two essential things. One, I learned slowly and painfully, and that was that you can't please all of your students all of the time. And, you know, it was really important to me when I started teaching that I tried to do the best for everybody, which means I wanted to have all my students be happy with what I was doing all the time. And it's a really painful lesson to realize that some of your students are gonna hate you. That sounds awful, but it's the reality. And if you allow yourself to get bogged down by that, then you miss out on all of the students who are learning from you and really do appreciate what you're doing. So you have to build a little bit of a thick skin and realize that they're not all going to love you, and that's just the way it is, right? And the other thing is just something that I really learned in the last 18 months more than anything else, and that is that no matter what your discipline, no matter how good you are at what you're teaching, you need to remember to infuse a little bit more humanity into your classroom because we get so caught up in wanting to teach our content and our discipline and have students learn that sometimes we forget that we're all just human as well.
Can you give us a brief example of what that humanity looks like in your classroom?
So I teach chemistry, obviously, and I have upwards of 200 students in my classroom at the same time. At Hunter, I had 800 or 900 at the same time. And in my online classes in chemistry, I was struggling because I can't see the students and I don't know when they're with me and when they're not. And I'm so caught up in trying to teach the chemistry content because they need to pass this ACS exam, right? I was so worried about that. And then I realized that I need more humanity. And so one of the things I did is I did two things. I decided to give up 10 minutes of class time, which seems like a little, but it's actually felt like a lot. And I started every class with an open question of just, how are you today? And my students responded anonymously, and it was like movie credits. The answers just floated up through the screen and we could all see what everybody else was feeling. And you got to draw pictures or upload things or write sentences or put a piece of music, whatever it was. And for 10 minutes, I just sat there and I let the class talk and I responded verbally to what they had to say about how they felt. And then at the end of that, I showed everybody what I called something beautiful, which is a photograph that I took that week of something that felt beautiful to me and didn't have to be visually appealing. Like one of the things I showed was my friend has an 11-year-old daughter who was failing math. And I started tutoring her and she sent me a screenshot of a math test where she got 17 out of 20. And that was my something beautiful for the week, was a screenshot of a math grade, 17 out of 20. Right, and then took a moment to talk to my students about why for me that was a beautiful moment. And so I gave up some chemistry time to do some like human things because I felt like we needed it. Like we were so isolated and so alone that we needed to know we were still together as humans.
That's great. Thank you. Ria, same question.
Thanks, Luis. I actually, when I started to think about this question, I had something very similar to Donna as well. I wanted to share with you guys a story of my student Juan Puya. I think of him in my head as a student who just did not like me for so, I don't know why. I wanted him to. He was a smart kid in my Composition 1 class and he did not. But I think there's something maybe a bit broader that I can add to this, is that it didn't occur to me based on like our experiences with people reacting to us as people, not just as students and instructors. It didn't strike me until much later that how emotional learning is. Maybe that's a bit basic for you guys, but I find all of learning to be a process in which I am intellectually engaged, but maybe at the first level, I need an emotional, like something that keeps me there as a student in a classroom or as a researcher on a project. And when I started teaching, I was aware of my own emotions, but I didn't really understand how I am not like managing a classroom is often about just managing emotions, other people's emotions, who they may not have a good grip on them either. And sometimes you just have to cut them some slack and just be like more human, as Donna was saying. And sometimes you just need to cut yourself some slack. And I wanted to sort of add two small things to that. One of them is that because maybe that learning is to me such an emotional or such a thing that begins with emotion, it's reiterative. Like I sort of like to say, you know, I have a great lesson plan for one day. It makes a cool point and I feel like the point is done. I've said it to my students, they've written it in their notes, it's over, but it's actually not, right? Teaching for the last, like, I don't know, 15 odd years has made me realize how reiterative my own learning process is. And I would encourage you guys to, when you're planning your classes, whether they're online or hybrid or in person, to think of like maybe 2 or 3 like higher level, like really sort of abstruse concepts that you want to get across with your syllabus, and kind of let students have the time to get back to them, because it's not easy sometimes to grasp. Like I teach literature, right? So like some philosophical point, something about close reading, something about the way that texts and people work. It's not so simple. We're just used to it now. And so that reiteration in my classrooms leads to some clarity. I get that from my students sometimes, that you're very clear. They may not like me, but they think I'm clear. But I think that reiteration leads to that. And then, you know, trust the process. And especially, I hope we will talk a little bit about being online and pedagogy, pandemic teaching, etc. But like, especially the last 18 or so months, I've never felt so, sorry if this is a bit downwards, but I've never felt so like useless as an instructor. I feel like usually I do make a difference in at least 3 months of someone's life. And this time it's been very much like I feel I have no impact on anyone at all. And I'm taught nothing and done nothing for someone. But, you know, it's worth it to realize, because these are emotional and reiterative processes, that things do happen in students, in an individual's mind that may not be clear to me, like straightforwardly, like in the 3 months I usually see a student, or in the couple of years if they are with me through in their time in community college, or honestly, even in like the 4 years or more. Sometimes things just take a little bit of time. I may come back to Juan Puya and the example later, but I'll let the others speak for now. Those are sort of my 3 things.
Thanks, Ria. Rojo?
Yes, that's a complex question, because it could be approached from different points of view. But now that we're talking about like classroom dynamics, I wanna go back to that idea that Donna brought about, like having breathing moments, momentos de respiración, with our students. And that should happen, I feel like that should happen in every class that we teach, that there should be a time in which like it's not that much about the material. It's not that much about the discussion, but more about the relationships that we're having with each other. That we should leave some space for community building, and that is something to take into consideration when we're building, like putting together the syllabus throughout the semester. Sometimes we're really excited about the class that we're teaching, and we want to put so much of our investigations, research, right? The things that we love about the materials that we're teaching, that many times we don't leave enough space to really enjoy the discussion, to also to interpolate to other things that are happening in our collective life, but also in the individual lives of every student. Another thing that I wanted to think about, with this question along with you, is this idea of how also how to always consider representation in the sense of, and in my case, that I teach humanities, cultural studies courses, literature, film courses, right? I have this is something that I have always have into consideration when I'm building my syllabus. But I have noticed that it's really important for the students to see themselves represented, right? So if we're teaching, for instance, I teach a lot of courses on Latin America, so it's very important to balance the syllabus, so the people from the Caribbean can see themselves represented, the people from Central America, the people from South America, and they appreciate that you put the effort of having a space for their community, for their country, for their ancestral homeland, whatever that is, right? And yes, that's something that I wanted to bring forth to the discussion. I'm gonna pass it to Shawna.
So sorry, I had to duck out there. This really touches on, I am my own object lesson, and I hope that you will all be smarter than me. You probably are. But the big thing I wish I had known was that students are people with complex lives and needs. And that's sort of what Donna said. Some of them are not going to like you. Much of what your students will do has nothing to do with you, right? When I started, I would get really offended that my students wouldn't come to class. And it turns out when you have a sick child, or your childcare is lost, or your boss says they're going to fire you if you leave early, you have to make really tough choices. And it shouldn't be that our students have to make those choices, but the reality is that they do. I did not really realize this when I started. I came from 2 decades of Catholic school, and then I topped that off with disciplinary training in political science. So very conservative, sort of you show up, you sit there, you listen, you take the test, you're done. And so that's what I replicated. And it did not go well for any of us. They hated it. It didn't work really well. I hated it. And it took me a while to realize that I don't have to do that. So none of you have to do that. You probably already know that because you're a brilliant new crop of graduate students. And we're so excited to have you, and welcome to CUNY if you haven't been here before. But I also want to touch on what Rojo had said about our students being able to see themselves. And this was not something, again, very traditional discipline in political science. We sort of silo off our race and ethnicity politics as another subfield. That's not my subfield. I'm an international relations person, which doesn't even think about race, which is ridiculous. But thinking about what that means for our students, they are embodied people living in an actual system. So I can't teach government effectively without that. And it wasn't until I started looking at the actual content of what we were doing and saying, and so I did a study about this. One thing is trying to figure out how you can balance your research that you need to be doing for your classes and for your dissertation and your teaching responsibilities. And that is really too much work to do, but it's the work that will be expected of you when you are in, either if you go into industry or if you go into academia. Everyone is being made to do too much. So at least here in CUNY, we get practice at doing too much to begin with. And thinking about that has really informed my teaching, right? So that if I ran this study and I saw that there is not content in an Intro to American Government book, there just isn't, about people of color. What there is siloed into the civil rights chapter. And what does that say to my students? that they're only worth one chapter of the whole class. So that's too much already.
Right, Shawna. So that sort of takes me to the next question that it will be, what should new instructors know about CUNY students? What's the things that you have learned about CUNY students that you feel are important for new instructors to know before walking into the space? Rojo?
Yes. So I will have to start by saying that our students are very complex and they have layered identities. They're very diverse in every possible way in terms of age, the languages they speak, gender, sexual orientation, religions, spiritual practices, citizenship status. That's very important. Their own, but also their parents, siblings, etc. Our students are Black and brown, if we want to be specific, but also migrants, and they're also from so many different countries. Many of them are working class, many of them are working part-time, many of them are working full-time. Many comes from marginalized communities, but also they come from rich and vibrant, under the radar cultures. Right now, many have been affected by COVID-19, by institutional racism all their life, discrimination, colonialism that applies to me, of course, as a Puerto Rican, but also many other people. Many experience mental health, as we are all like mental health issues, as many of us are experiencing because of the pandemic, but also because of all those other aspects that I have been describing. So for me, it's about like not trying to pinpoint what they are, but accepting that it's a very complex body of people, right? Like we have a richness that comes with the students and their experiences that we should acknowledge and celebrate that.
Great, Ria?
I was agreeing with Rojo very much, and picking up from that, I wanted to say something that this is sort of like something I wish someone had told me when I first started, as well as something about what I found in CUNY students. I used to be completely uninterested in the website of City College, where I started my graduate teaching fellow assignment. I like never looked at their demographic breakdowns. I felt like the classroom will tell me what I need to know. And that's sort of true. And I hear that in what Rojo you're saying, and classrooms have told me a lot, right? The group of people you get, those are the people you're dealing with. If you're sensitive to them, I think you're fine. But you know, I've been at CUNY for like most of my life now, so I kind of have a sense of different CUNY campuses being quite distinct from each other in their own little microcosmic ways. So I would sort of encourage you guys to not be me and to actually go and look at your campus, like those sort of boring sort of stats and figures. Where do our students come from? So for example, at Guttman, I feel like, oh, my students are from everywhere. No, my students are actually usually from the Bronx and often like deep in Brooklyn. So that gives me a sense, you know, it tells me certain things about what immigrant communities they might possibly be coming from. It even tells me little things like, oh man, the trains are really bad. So if the 2 and 3 trains have broken down, then a lot of my students are going to be late to class. I can be super mad about some students being late, or I can think like, oh yeah, I take those same trains. I understand something. You know, they can be very like low level practical things you can get from that, and also higher level. And the other thing I wanted to say that I've realized about CUNY students is, sorry, Shawna, hey, you know, my experience of CUNY is that I am usually a political moderate in many CUNY discussions I've been. I'm not like super, you know, I belong to a union. I believe in lefty liberal politics, but, you know, I feel like I'm very middle of the road, like liberal-ish. And then I speak to my students, or honestly, I just speak to like my parents or friends. And it turns out I am not. And CUNY has in my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're pretty lefty in CUNY. This is like a little like socialist bubble in the sort of capitalist hellhole that New York is. My students have often been politically, socially, religiously conservative as heck. They're immigrant students who have told me DACA is a crap program. There have been students of color who tell me how much they love the police. You know, there's so many different things in a literature classroom that comes up, like your lived experience. And I'll say something that I consider non-controversial, like, you know, Walmart sucks, capitalism, down with it. And students have questioned me on that, and they've said, like, what do you mean? I go to Walmart all the time. And I'm like, wait, I wasn't even making a controversial statement. You know, war is bad. Someone shows up and says, well, you know, is peace that great? I'm just giving you some sort of strange offbeat responses that I've had sometimes. But what I mean is that I thought my younger students would be automatically more politically liberal than they sometimes are. You know, I've had papers on students who don't think that the war on drugs is a real war and there should be actually more crackdown on all the pot smoking industry. You know, that sort of thing. It's something you'll have to deal with, because I'm still the instructor to those students. And it really took me by surprise, but there you have it.
That's great. Donna, do you want to add something? Shawna, I don't want to.
I will add only one thing. You know, New York City is a melting pot, and in your CUNY classrooms that will be reflected. And realize that a lot of your students have other lives and do not have family support, which means there are time constraints that you may not have considered. And in a discipline like chemistry, where I expect them to put 20 hours a week into my class, or they're not going to have time to learn, that comes up against me all the time, right? So just remember that they have other lives. That's not to say students in the whole country don't, they do. But the diversity in your classroom is huge in New York City and at CUNY.
If I can be quick, I just want to sort of say, so there is this thing, we can't really know all of our students, right? I think that you should absolutely look at the demographic data. You should absolutely talk to your students if you can make a space that humanness, that community, but also realize that there are things that students will not want to tell you. And so, so students who are experience domestic violence, sexual violence, poverty, they don't necessarily want to say that. And then you run into cultural things as well, where students may not think that it's appropriate to disclose that, right? So we get into first gen versus second gen students as well. We have a lot of first gen students who don't know that it's okay to ask for an extension, or that you can tell your professor that you're struggling. And for me, while I'm working on the humanness of getting to know my students and letting them know that that's okay, that's not going to feel comfortable for all students. And I don't want to disadvantage students who I don't want to make my students bleed. And I used to do this thing, right? Like, all right, we have a midterm, so just, you know, call grandma and tell her you love her, because grandmas tend to kick it right around. I was the worst person, right? Because I now know that if a student tells you that their grandma died, and they've done it before, right? There are a lot worse things than a grandma dying, but grandma dying is very general. Everybody knows, and they can give you, you know, some space. So if a student has been raped, if a student has been made homeless, if a student's house has burned down, or any number of things, and these are just the short list of things that I've had students who did want to tell me, saying grandma died is a lot easier. So generally just thinking about designing for all of the students and really incorporating a lot of student choice, because we have to trust students know what is best for them. They are the ones who know how they learn best. They are the ones who are going to know what they want to do. Right? It's impossible, especially the standard class size at Kingsborough is 45 students, right? I want to get to all of mine now, and our teaching load is 4 courses. So, and for our adjuncts and part-timers, it's 5, which is another topic for another time. That's absolutely untenable. But even our online classes in this emergency time have been 29 students. It's really hard to get to know every student individually, 29, and custom tailor things. So I've moved to a more choose your own adventure approach so that they can choose what's right for them.
Great, thank you. So, well, this is exactly the next question about what you mentioned, Sean, about the choices that you make to sort of serve your students' needs. And Joseph is participating in the Q&A, so he's asking, what are some of the key questions that you ask yourself when building a class? And I would like all of you to talk a little bit about sort of that thinking process from the moment that you're assigned a class to the moment that you start teaching it. So Donna?
Sure. So, you know, the moment I'm assigned to a class, I have a moment of panic always, even when it's a class I've done before, because I always want to think about, you know, what worked last time and what didn't, and how do I improve upon that, right? And I have a colleague, and again, you know, my discipline is very different. Chemistry is very factual. We have a lot of content. I would say my students have to memorize 100 facts and then apply them to 1,000 situations, right? And that ask, when you think about it, is just impossible. You know, if you think about the fact that it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill, and in chemistry, I want you to master 200 skills in 14 weeks, it's just not possible, right? So I have a colleague who's done a study, and he started looking at the students who were getting A's in his class. And he started asking them to check off in boxes what it is they did to prepare for the exam. And his expectation was the A students are going to say, I came to lecture, I came to office hours, I did my homework. Because those are like the cornerstone things we believe drives learning. And interestingly, that's not what he found. What he found is that of the 10 resources he made available, the students who were getting A's were using 8 resources, but which 8 they were using were totally random. And that changed the way I thought about learning, because I need to provide at least 8 different ways for my students to learn all of these things if I want them to be successful. If I'm only giving them lecture and homework and office hours, that's only 3 resources. None of them are going to get 8, right? By his study. And so when I'm teaching, what I'm always thinking about as I plan my course is how many different ways can I give my students access to the stuff that matters? And so I started a long time ago, many of you know this, looking at how to use technology and online learning skills to infuse those into my in-person classroom to help my students learn. So when you build your classroom, when you think about what you're doing, one, don't panic. You are the expert in your content, right? But remember that me telling you what it is isn't helping you learn, right? Learning, teaching is not telling. I can tell you 1,000 times and beat your head against the wall. You're not going to learn it. As a student, you need ways to take what I'm telling you and internalize it. You need to go through some cognitive dissonance. You need to struggle and overcome that. And then what you've learned will stick with you. So as you are all preparing to teach, just think about the different ways that you can use and the different types of learning you can bring into your classroom so that all of your students have access, right? That's all they need. They need lots of different ways to approach the material. And then again, be a human and realize that life happens. Life happens to all of us.
Is teaching is not telling copyrighted? I'm thinking about.
No, it's in the chemical education literature, actually. If you look at constructive learning, they coined that. Teaching is not telling.
I'm gonna get a T-shirt. Thank you so much, Donna. Shawna, you were writing in the chat, but
I thought, so one thing I do about this, besides co-signing everything that Donna just said, the more that students can do, right? Me talking, and I have this high school theater geek thing in me where I want to say everything. I have to watch myself really carefully because I love my jokes, I love my shtick, but it's not stand-up, right? We're here for the students, so I have to watch that in myself. Because the more that, if that worked, right, if my brilliance just spewing it out to them was what got them to learn, I would do it, but it does not, right? So the best thing, the more that they do, the more that they will learn, has been my experience with my content. Like, your mileage will vary. And this relates to, one specific practice is I keep a Google Doc of every semester of things that work or don't work, right? So at the end, when we were in person, I would be at the lecture turn, signing out. If something went really well, I'd be like, great, do this. If something needs a tweak, I'd be like, just add this. Takes maybe 30 seconds. And if I don't do it in class, I do it on my phone on the train on the way home, or now, via Zoom, but keeping that so that if it's a class that I don't get to teach often, it will, as soon as it gets in here, it flies out again. So keeping some sort of a searchable cloud backed up version of that is really helpful to me.
Great. Ria?
I have something to say, but I just wanted to underline Donna and Shawna both sort of talked about, in my mind, as like UDL, right? Universal Design for Learning. And I hope that in one of the later questions, we can circle back to those because I have lots of thoughts about those and all positive. And these guys know what they're talking about. But in terms of what I do for planning a class, which is I think specifically the question that came up in the chat, is something I didn't do when I was an adjunct, and what I see sometimes in my adjunct, who I oversee at Guttman now, is like maybe it's asking too much. So this is with the writer, that perhaps this is too much to ask from you, but it helps a lot to know where in the sequence of a student's career at your institution your specific course falls. So like my example is, I'm an English teacher, so I teach Comp 1 like over and over endlessly. I teach Comp 1 courses and writing courses, but then I also get to teach 200 level writing courses. I also get to teach grad film classes, and each of those, like often like the content is sometimes not that different, like something that I teach in the first year in English composition, say like a poem or a film in Comp 1 is going to work differently from a poem or a film in a 200, 300, 400, 600 level course, even when the text is stable. It sounds like very basic advice, but I mean that I teach at a community college, which is only 2 years. And before I had like 7 years of teaching experience at community college, I would have thought it's about the same. But in fact, I see students mature, like it's a huge learning curve from the first semester community college to the second, third, fourth semester. And I see students change so like magically, like even students who aren't that engaged with academic work, right? The students that Shawna mentioned who have 50 other things going on. And like even those people are changing and maturing as academics, even if they are plenty mature enough as like adults and other spheres of life. So, how I would pitch something or put something in my syllabus in my Comp 1 class, which is the first semester, is really different from how I would do the similar content 3 semesters later, which, is only a year and a half, but it really changes things. So for your own maybe sake, be clear about where in the longer span of the student's life with the department or the institution, where exactly your class falls. And then the other thing is, we've hinted at it, but this is something that the folks at the IT and pedagogy program at the grad center are constantly talking about, at least when I was there, is beware of scope creep, right? ACT class is 3 months tops, sometimes even 1.5 months or 2 months of someone's life. You will probably want to teach your favorite students, the shining stars, the angels in your class. You'll want to teach them everything at all times, but it's one course, right? It's better to do a very like clear, topic-driven, thematic, interesting thing well than to try to put everything that you know about a larger topic, like to stuff it into the class. And I hear that in what, Donna, you said about the sheer volume of content that you have in chemistry, which I don't know anything about. But for example, I could babble on about T.S. Eliot and poetry for like too many hours, but it doesn't need to all be in there. The students who gets me, unfortunately for them, the first time in their life, maybe they only need about 2 hours of my song and dance shtick, right? They can come back later, or they can get more from somewhere else, from other people. So that scope creep has been very important for me over the course of my now about 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just to add, like at the beginning, it's like you want to make sure that you're covering like so many texts and books and everything. But I feel that you're teaching also methods, how to approach books that you're not able to cover. Yeah, Rojo?
Yeah, so when I'm designing a new course, I start by doing a brainstorm with myself, and I try to make like an uncensored list of readings, films. Many times I'm teaching films, so that includes films and other sources, podcasts, articles, etc. Yeah, that I will include, and also the assignments that I would like to teach. and to put in my course. Yeah, so at the beginning I have like this gigantic list, and then I start to identify patterns, right? Thematic patterns, topics that I feel like are very clear, that there's like 2 or 3 texts that talk to each other, and then I start building units. Yeah. Many times during a course, my experience is that usually I can have 2 to 4 units, yeah, depending, 4 short units or 2 big units, right? And I also try to find like a narrative arc, yeah. So the course kind of like have all the texts, all the films, all the sources are in conversation with each other, and we can kind of like trace, yeah, different perspective within kind of like the same field, right? So then the process is editing, right? Editing that list, and based on those, on the narrative arc, on the units you created, on the topics that you want to address. And also another thing to consider is the constraint of the course. Yeah, that constraints could be the historical period. If it's contemporary literature or film, if it's 19th century, colonial times, whatever that is, genres, yeah, genres in terms of to have like a good amount of queer people, women, men, right? Race also, I also try to take race into consideration when putting my syllabus together. Geographies, in the case of Latin American courses, and use Latinx communities, also that is very important. And also take into consideration the calendar, the different stages during the semester. So for instance, at the end of the semester, you should have something lighter, right? Right now I'm designing a course on contemporary Latin American fiction, and the last piece that we're going to read, or at least that I'm planning to read with my students, is going to be a graphic novel, right? Because I feel like it's a good come down from all the other texts, and we're going to be reading novels and short stories. So for instance, in terms of those stages, I'm starting with short stories, kind of like starting to build community, starting to know each other. Then we get into the 2 novels that we're going to read, and then we finish with a graphic novel. So it kind of like balance it out in terms of the energy that our students have throughout the semester, but also that I have at the end of the semester. I'm also very tired, and I want to take it easy, just like them. So I take into consideration all those things, the moods, yeah, and at the end, something that I love doing is at the end I present the syllabus to my students, and I gather feedback from them, and I gather suggestions from them, and then I tweak the syllabus. And many times there has been semester that I have changed a lot the syllabus based on their interest, on their research interest, on the geographies that they want to explore, or the type of authors that they want to read. And at times it's just a little tweak here and there. And also what I was mentioning before, like the breathing room. Also, like at the end, I usually try to cut, because I know that I try to put so much. So I always force myself to cut in order to have those breathing moments throughout the semester.
Great. So many helpful things, that all of you have mentioned. If we were going to talk about my teaching failures, we will be here for a couple of days. But I want to ask you about your teaching failures, and I want you to be aware of the time, because I want to leave some few minutes for questions from the audience. So Ria, do you want to share with us one of your teaching failures? What went wrong? What did you learn about it?
Sure. I think, there's so many. As you said, I had to pick one teaching failure. I think I'll reiterate what we started with, that sometimes your teaching failure is not about you, because it's about the 2 people in the room, at least, which is you and the student. If you are at Guttman, we work in cohorts of students. So sometimes the failure of communication that can happen in a room is actually me, my students 4 best friends, all like getting in the way of each other. So sometimes the teaching failure is just people. But the thing that changed the most for me, maybe it's a bit similar to what Shawna, you mentioned, that I came from I'm Indian. I came from a pretty strict educational system. There was lots of exams. I came to grad school. I went to a fairly straightforward liberal arts college. I was really into the whole, like, you know, my professor is going to be strict and I am going to be someone who has these rules and these rules make sense, damn it. Over the course of my time at CUNY, I've really come to question many things about how I was taught. And I think those are often the moments of my teaching failures, is when I've been trying to replicate classrooms I have been in that I liked just because I liked them. There was no reason, I was just in them and I liked them. And I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Donna?
So, you know, often when you design a course and you have the freedom to play with your content, you get to do that. But in a discipline like mine, I don't. There's certain content that I have to teach. So my freedom comes in how I teach that content. And, you know, some of you have heard this story. I told it a few years ago when I served on this panel, but one of my biggest failures in teaching was in doing just that, was in trying to make something more relatable to my students by using an anecdote that I thought everybody would just understand. And so I want you just to live through this horror with me for a moment. But I had a class of 150 freshmen. So I was their very first college class. And we were talking in chemistry about a particle, and a particle in chemistry is complicated because it can be one of many, many different things. And so I wanted them to understand that a particle can be an atom, or it can be a molecule, or it can be an ion, or it can be X, Y, or Z. And I decided in my brightest moment to use a human as an example. And so I stood in the front of the room and I said to all of them, so think about humans. For example, if we consider Vaughan, a young Asian man who sat in the front row, I will never forget. If I wanted to tell you whether Vaughan was a male or a female, I would need to examine Vaughan more closely. And I said this to 150 18-year-olds who then imagined me, their professor, examining poor Vaughan more closely to classify him as a male or a female. So my failure was in not thinking through my anecdotes carefully before walking into the classroom, in thinking that I was smart enough to just shoot off the cuff if the students needed me to ask something. And what I learned painfully, because then I got a call from the dean telling me that I cannot say inappropriate things in the classroom, right? Which could be interpreted that I did that, right? It was my first semester teaching. I really didn't think about it. I was young enough that the kids thought of me as being one of them, right? It was a huge faux pas. So what is the lesson that I learned? The lesson that I learned is that I have to think about the anecdotes that I want to use before time. Doesn't mean I don't have freedom in the classroom to say things and go with the flow as it goes, but I need to be careful that if I'm going to use something related to everyday life, that it is equitable, that it is fair, that I'm not saying anything that's going to offend any one of my students. And again, this comes back to, we're not all white girls in the classroom, right? I'm saying white girl because that's me, right? I'm an immigrant, so I understand that. My husband was undocumented for many years when I met him, so I understand that. But when students look at me, they don't see any of that, right? They simply see a white girl who speaks with a British accent. And so I learned that my students are going to judge me. I have to think carefully about what I'm going to say, and I can't just shoot from the cuff. So take that with you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Rojo?
Yeah, this is not so much a failure, but a work in progress. I've been like, in the last couple of years, I've been experimenting with creative assignments. And also using social media, or proposing the use of social media as a kind of public scholarship with my students. So I've been like developing these creative assignments to reflect on our class discussions and sources. And at the beginning, I thought of it as something that was liberating. Yeah, that was gonna be like a relief for everybody, right? That it was like something that everybody was gonna be celebrating. And some people, yeah, some of our students or my students have been celebrating the fact that they can create, to write a poem or do like a collage, or kind of like do a digital artwork to kind of like reflect on any given reading that we did. But something that I have noticed is that not everybody feels comfortable with those possibilities. So right now, instead of just like doing a creative project for everybody, yeah, what I do is like an option-based assignments, yeah. So one for their midterm and one for the final. So they have the possibility of doing more of a traditional assignment, such as writing a paper. And this is a humanities classroom. I'm talking from that perspective, right? So doing like an argumentative paper, an analytical paper, yeah, or they can do a creative project along with a reflection. I also found that the reflection was very important. There needs to be a reflection on how the creative piece interact with the sources, because at the beginning I just like asked for the creative project, and many times the creative project was great, but kind of like a little unrelated, yeah, to what we were doing in the classroom. So I added, yeah, that component of having a reflection on how, yeah, the creative piece is in conversation, yeah, with the sources, with the topics, with the discussion in the classroom, right? So it allows them to ground their projects on that reflection. I also found that it's very important to offer templates, yeah, to like show like successful projects from previous semesters, successful poems, successful artwork, podcasts. I'm also like incorporating podcasts, yeah. So right now I'm also like giving them like some examples so they can like kind of like have a reference to how they can frame their projects. And also like to, I have noticed also that when they do creative projects, they like to share that with the other classmates. So it's always good to have like a session in which the people who are doing creative projects can like share that with the rest of the class, right? And they always like feel really happy about learning about what the other people are doing. And it becomes a way also of doing community building. Yeah, so that's my experience regarding that long process that I'm still developing and polishing of using creative assignments into the classroom.
Perfect. Shawna?
I have so many errors. I've written about them. So if you do a search of me, you can find all the many mistakes, but I'll give you one related to one of the questions in the Q&A about online teaching. This happened in the first semester. I went emergency distance online. We went asynchronous for equity, and because it was such a mess. But many of my students got back to me and they missed that face-to-face element, right? So I said, all right, I'm going to do a hybrid, synchronous, asynchronous. We're still all online, but I'm going to divide the group. I'm going to be really smart because 3 hours of Zoom is too much in a week for my class. I'm going to divide everyone into 3 groups, and then they're going to be teams. And that's going to be the small group that works together. And then I'll meet with a Monday group, a Tuesday group, a Wednesday group, all right, on the different days of the class. And then there's 2 sub teams and they'll each prepare. And someone should have said to me, like, I see Donna just shake your head, like, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? They'll each prepare. And so I won't be teaching the class. It'll be them doing it. It'll be group and it'll be asynchronous. It was way too much to ask of the students. And it was way too much to try and manage. It was adding so much stress instead of what I was trying to do. But the thing that I learned that I put into practice there that I hadn't previously was that if something is such an obvious failure, it's okay to stop. It's okay, we can change. I do my syllabus out at the beginning, and I have all the assignments linked because that way students can see at a time when they can get their money back if they do not want to be in my class. And I think that's good. And it helps me because then I can focus on running instead of building. So changing something midstream seems very unfair to me, but this was so obviously not working, but I didn't want to do it without consulting the students because they all signed up. So I talked about it in each of the classes. I said, let's move this. If I'm going to teach the same thing every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, let's just all do it on Tuesday. You were all supposed to have that time linked anyway, because that's how it was in CUNY first. And we'll do other things. And I did a survey. I was like, if we can get to, and I made it part of the class. I was like, if we can get to a super majority, not even a simple majority, but a 2/3 majority, as if we were going to propose an amendment to the Constitution. And it was overwhelming. Right? There was one student who was like, and I reached out to them. I said, I see that you want to keep doing this, but your group doesn't want to. If you want to keep meeting with me on other days, and they're like, no, I'm good. So taking if something is really not working with you, it's okay to be that person. That was a lesson I didn't really know at the beginning, where I'm like, I've got to keep a good face. I've got to keep this going. I need to project my authority. So I've got to stay cool and keep it moving and be like, nope, this is awful, right? This is terrible. And I apologized to them. And I said, look, this is going really badly. Let's do something else. And it's still being aware of that with students. And I saw a question earlier about how do you manage your personality, right? Your presentation. I used to dress really formally because I looked young and I was young at the time. And I'm still, as you have noticed, like Donna, a white girl. So that is something that just happens, right? And I thought I had to project this effort of authority, and I really have moved away from that, and that works for me. I have colleagues who still dress very formally, and it works for them. And there's definitely racial, ethnic, class, gender and sexuality elements to this. I'm afforded a lot of privilege and a lot of respect automatically because of my race and because of my accent that many of my colleagues are not automatically afforded. So figuring out what works for you individually, and then being okay with switching it up. If you want to change, you can change. We're all growing and evolving people in a rapidly changing, still ongoing pandemic. So.
Right, so I have two questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask the first one, and whoever of you who wants to answer, go ahead. So this is Ayana's question. As Donna mentioned, your students will judge you. How do you judge or manage how much of your identity and experiences to share with your students, and how much do you expect them to share with you and with the class? So whoever wants to answer.
I can try. Interestingly, I just wrote in the chat, you have to be who you are. You know, you have to embrace yourself and let it show. So I am who I am. I teach in ripped jeans and a tank top. I have tattoos that show. I let it go. I have weird hair, right? I teach in sneakers. This is who I am. I walk into the classroom and I tell them, my name is Donna, not Professor McGregor. The only thing I've got on you is time, right? I have more training than you do because I'm older than you do. That's it. I'm not smarter. I'm not better. I'm not richer. I'm not prettier. I'm older and I have time, and that's it. And I used to think that I couldn't share myself with my students because it was inappropriate. I've always been who I am, but I never shared it. But in the last 5 years, I've started sharing because, you know, I got student feedback and a student wrote and said, we're not all rich white girls whose parents paid for everything. At which point I had a mini meltdown because I'm not a rich white girl whose parents paid for everything. I grew up in Africa. You would never know it, but I did. I left at 18 and flew to America with a suitcase by myself, and I figured out how to cut it. My husband is a Venezuelan who was undocumented for 6 years. You know, I am not who they think I am. And I worked 40 hours a week while studying and trying to live alone. And I now tell my students, I start with a map of the world and I say, you know, when you look at me, you don't see this. You see this tiny country called Namibia? That's where I grew up. At 18, I got on a plane and I flew all the way to New York. In fact, I applied to only one university in the whole world and decided that fate would either take me to America or my whole life was going to have to get rethunk anyway. Right? And so as I got older, I've decided to share who I am with my students so that they don't feel intimidated by me, so that they realize I'm a little bit more like them than they think I am. And that's made a huge difference in how students view me and in what they are then willing to share with me. You know, my students, because I'm willing to make myself vulnerable on day one, my students will sometimes make themselves vulnerable back. And that's really helpful because sometimes students can't afford to buy the materials we need them to buy. And I never used to say anything. And now I say to them, you know, if you can't afford to buy access to the platform, please tell me. Whether you send me an anonymous email, you know, however it is, if you're comfortable, come to my office and talk to me, and I can find a way to give you access for free, right? And students now, before they never told me, now that I've started putting myself on the chopping block and saying, look, this is who I am and my life isn't perfect either, they're willing to share those things with me. And it helps to know where they're coming from, because then you can make the necessary accommodations so that they can grow as students and as people. Right? I hope that helps.
And I'll just add, Luis, if we have like 1 minute, that I think Shawna
Luis,
mentioned
that's a
this
good
as well.
comment. Sorry.
Yeah, that like both Donna, Shawna, you guys have all said this, like it's something that changes over time, right? When I was starting, I personally did not have the self-confidence it takes to let a room full of 30 students, 3 or 4 sets of them, just like know things about me. I was like, no, I'll be your poetry person or your composition person, but I cannot handle you having all these insights into me. And I think it's about developing a persona, of a teaching persona that will take you through time, right? When I was younger, I also looked very young. And when I think someone said in the chat, like, what do people call you? Well, I said, call me Ria. And then like nobody did my homework or my readings and thought Ria was their pal and they would get A's in my class. It turns out Ria's a hard ass. And then everyone was very upset. So, you know, now I can, just because I look a bit older and I like dress in certain ways and I talk in dated ways to my students, and that's fine, and it works actually to a certain kind of advantage. I can tell them to call me anything now. It doesn't really matter as much as it did when I was 24 and teaching my first seminar, you know. So things are going to change a lot. Just, I don't know, for what it's worth, keep that in mind.
Rachel, I want to have like a final question. I'm aware of the time and I want to sort of respect everybody's commitment, but I just want to squeeze this last one in here. So how did teaching online for the last 18 months affect your teaching practice? What would you continue to do even in person or in hybrid formats? And again, if you have something to say and want to share.
So I will just say it made me humble. Like teaching online made me humble as a human. Forget as a teacher, just as a human. And I will continue to do all the humane things that I infused into my classroom in person as well. I don't know why I never did them before. Like when I reflect back, I'm just like, what was wrong with you? Like, how did you ever think they were just gonna do it?
I will say that we're always living, but also surviving. And the pandemic made that last part like very clear that all of us are surviving a pandemic. All of us are surviving inequality. All of us are surviving colonialism. And in many different ways, through different positions, through different privilege, but through different spaces that at times are marginalized, and at times they're like good, healthy spaces. But nonetheless, like we're all like surviving in one way or another, and it's important to take that into consideration. It's important to understand that precisely we have talked here today about like the humanness of us all, and yeah, that's something that the pandemic kind of like make it loud and clear, right? That's more important, to be healthy, to be like in a space in which you feel an amount of safety, right? It's important. And if you can build that in your classroom and understand where your students or try to understand where your students are coming from, the type of survival they are skills that they're like developing, all that needs to be infused on our pedagogies, more than the content, more than the units that you want to cover, right? The most important part is to use the classroom as a space for growing together, and if possible as a self-care and as a care space for everybody.
Thank you so much, Rojo. So I want to thank Donna, Shawna, Ria, and Rojo, because well, you share your experience, your expertise, but also just by being models of what it means to be so intelligent, so compassionate, and so cool. And no, you all are. So thank you so much, and I hope that the attendees have found this inspiring. And there's a lot of questions. So if you have an open question for Donna, Shawna, Ria, and Rojo, you can send it on an email. And if they don't reply to you, let me know, and I'll talk to them. So it was great seeing you, even albeit in this sort of digital in my living room. And hopefully we meet again and we learn more about the excellent, amazing, and really cool work that you're doing at CUNY. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
everyone.
Can we clap?
Buenas tardes
People
a
clapping in
todos.
the living
a
room.
todas.
Is the chat clapping?